boy peacefully asleep in the unbroken solitude of the place. In the window were exhibited to the passing stranger three forlorn little fly-spotted frames, a small posting bill, dusty with long continued neglect, announcing that the premises were to let, and one colored print, the last of a series illustrating the horrors of drunkenness, on the fiercest temperance principles. The composition, representing an empty bottle of gin, an immensely spacious garret, a perpendicular scripture reader, and a horizontal expiring family, appealed to public favor under the entirely unobjectionable title of "The Hand of Death." Allan's resolution to extract amusement from Castletown by main force had resisted a great deal, but it failed him at this stage of the investigations. He suggested trying an excursion to some other place. Midwinter readily agreeing, they went back to the hotel to make inquiries. Thanks to the mixed influence of Allan's ready gift of familiarity, and total want of method in putting his questions, a perfect deluge of information flowed in on the two strangers, relating to every subject but the subject which had actually brought them to the hotel. They made various interesting discoveries in connection with the laws and constitution of the Isle of Man, and the manners and customs of the natives. To Allan's delight, the Manxmen spoke of England as of a well-known adjacent island situated at a certain distance from the central empire of the Isle of Man. It was further revealed to the two Englishmen that this happy little nation rejoiced in laws of its own, publicly proclaimed once a year by the governor and the two head judges, grouped together on top of an ancient mound, in fancy costumes appropriate to the occasion. Possessing this enviable institution, the island added to it the inestimable blessing of a local parliament, called the House of Keys, an assembly far in advance of the other parliament belonging to the neighboring island in this respect, that the members dispensed with the people and solemnly elected each other. With these and many more local particulars, extracted from all sorts and conditions of men in and about the hotel, Allan whiled away the weary time in his own essentially desultory manner, until the gossip died out of itself, and Midwinter, who had been speaking apart with the landlord, quietly recalled him to the matter in hand. The finest coast scenery in the island was said to be the westward and the southward, and there was a fishing town in those regions called Port St. Mary, with a hotel at which travelers could sleep. If Allan's impressions of Castletown still inclined him to try an excursion to some other place, he had only to say so, and a carriage would be produced immediately. Allan jumped at the proposal, and in 10 minutes more he and Midwinter were on their way to the western wilds of the island. With trifling incidents, the day of Mr. Brock's departure had worn on thus far. With trifling incidents, in which not even Midwinter's nervous watchfulness could see anything to distrust, it was still to proceed until the night came, a night which one at least of the two companions was destined to remember to the end of his life. Before the companions had advanced 2 miles on their road, an accident happened. The horse fell, and the driver reported that the animal had seriously injured himself. There was no alternative but to send for another carriage to Castletown, or to get on to Port St. Mary on foot. Deciding to walk, Midwinter and Allan had not gone far before they were overtaken by a gentleman driving alone in an open chaise. He civilly introduced himself as a medical man, living close to Port St. Mary, and offered seats in his carriage. Always ready to make new acquaintances, Allan at once accepted the proposal. He and the doctor, whose name was ascertained to be Hawbury, became friendly and familiar before they had been 5 minutes in the chaise together. Midwinter, sitting behind them, reserved and silent, on the back seat. They separated just outside Port St. Mary, before Mr. Hawbury's house, Allan boisterously admiring the doctor's neat French windows and pretty flower garden and lawn, and wringing his hand at parting as if they had known each other from boyhood upward. Arrived in Port St. Mary, the two friends found themselves in a second Castletown on a smaller scale; but the country round, wild, open, and hilly, deserved its reputation. A walk brought them well enough on with the day, still the harmless, idle day that it had been from the first, to see the evening near at hand. After waiting a little to admire the sun, setting grandly over hill and heath and crag, and talking, while they waited, of Mr. Brock and his long journey home, they returned to the hotel to order their early supper. Nearer and nearer the night, and the adventure which the night was to bring with it, came to the two friends, and still the only incidents that happened were incidents to be laughed at if they were noticed at all. The supper was badly cooked. The waiting-maid was impenetrably stupid. The old-fashioned bell-rope in the coffee-room had come down in Allan's hands, and, striking in its descent a painted china shepherdess on the chimney-piece, had laid the figure in fragments on the floor. Events as trifling as these were still the only events that had happened, when the twilight faded and the lighted candles were brought into the room. Finding Midwinter, after the double fatigue of a sleepless night and a restless day, but little inclined for conversation, Allan left him resting on the sofa, and lounged into the passage of the hotel on the chance of discovering somebody to talk to. Here another of the trivial incidents of the day brought Allan and Mr. Hawbury together again, and helped, whether happily or not yet remained to be seen, to strengthen the acquaintance between them on either side. The bar of the hotel was situated at one end of the passage, and the landlady was in attendance there, mixing a glass of liquor for the doctor, who had just looked in for a little gossip. On Allan's asking permission to make a third in the drinking and the gossiping, Mr. Hawbury civilly handed him the glass which the landlady had just filled. It contained cold brandy and water. A marked change in Allan's face, as he suddenly drew back and asked for a whisky instead, caught the doctor's medical eye. "A case of nervous antipathy," said Mr. Hawbury, quietly taking the glass away again. The remark obliged Allan to acknowledge that he had an insurmountable loathing, which he was foolish enough to be a little ashamed of mentioning, to the smell and taste of brandy. No matter with what diluting fluid the spirit was mixed, the presence of it, instantly detected by his organs of taste and smell, turned him sick and faint if the drink touched his lips. Starting from this personal confession, the talk turned on antipathies in general, and the doctor acknowledged on his side that he took a professional interest in the subject, and that he possessed a collection of curious cases at home which his new acquaintance was welcome to look at, if Allan had nothing else to do that evening, and if he would call when the medical work of the day was over, in an hour's time. Cordially accepting the invitation, which was extended to Midwinter also, if he cared to profit by it, Allan returned to the coffee-room to look after his friend. Half asleep and half awake, Midwinter was still stretched on the sofa, with the local newspaper just dropping out of his languid hand. "I heard your voice in the passage," he said, drowsily. "Whom were you talking to?" "The doctor," replied Allan. "I am going to smoke a cigar with him in an hour's time. Will you come too?" Midwinter assented with a weary sigh. Always shyly unwilling to make new acquaintances, fatigue increased the reluctance he now felt to become Mr. Hawbury's guest. As matters stood, however, there was no alternative but to go, for with Allan's constitutional imprudence there was no safely trusting him alone anywhere, and more especially in a stranger's house. Mr. Brock would certainly not have left his pupil to visit the doctor alone, and Midwinter was still nervously conscious that he occupied Mr. Brock's place. "What shall we do till it's time to go?" asked Allan, looking about him. "Anything in this?" he added, observing the fallen newspaper, and picking it up from the floor. "I'm too tired to look. If you find anything interesting, read it out," said Midwinter, thinking that the reading might help to keep him awake. Part of the newspaper, and no small part of it, was devoted to extracts from books recently published in London. One of the works most largely laid under contribution in this manner was of the sort to interest Allan. It was a highly spiced narrative of traveling adventures in the wilds of Australia. Pouncing on an extract which described the sufferings of the traveling party lost in a trackless wilderness and in danger of dying by thirst, Allan announced that he had found something to make his friend's flesh creep, and began eagerly to read the passage aloud. Resolute not to sleep, Midwinter followed the progress of the adventure, sentence by sentence,